The game, shake of hands, and Magnus brings out his knight. Knight to f3, knight comes out to f6. Both of them have played a world championship match against each other in 2018. A match that had all the games ending in draws, which means that they are so evenly matched. But there is definitely something that Magnus has in him that has kept him world number 1 for years and not let Fabi overtake him. Here he goes knight to c3, bishop comes out to b7 and d4. So we have the Queen's Indian now on the board through some different move order. And Magnus can go for a g3 line, but then he's already committed to having a knight on c3, which maybe he's not so comfortable with. The other idea is to play a3, which leads to this Petrosian-Kasparov system. He plays a3. And now his positional idea is d5 to block this bishop, because then bishop b4 is no longer possible. And Caruana plays knight e4. It's not the main move. The main move there was d5, but this is played, and Magnus has a very small edge here because of the space in the center. He even trades off the bishop. I think these are positions that Magnus loves because they are simple and he just knows where each piece goes to. So you will see him making his moves pretty quickly here. Now d6 played. One of the main moves that you can play in such positions is to play b4, gaining space on the queen side and also preparing to activate your bishop on b2. The other ideas, of course, are maybe expanding in the center. He goes b4. And space is what Magnus has, but there are only 2 pairs of minor pieces on the board, so it's not like there are black is too much cramped for space, cramped for room here. Okay, knight bd7 played, and maybe somewhere your idea is to push e5 or c5, so rook d1 played here by Magnus, which is a good move. And a5, Fabi tries to create play. This is typical move. b5 could be played here to clamp down the queen side, but even bishop b2 looks like a very useful move, just finishing your development there. And yes, he plays his bishop to b2. Now for black, he needs to figure out what his next plan is. One of them is to play bishop to f6. Knight f6 also possible, looking at the e4 square. It's not improbable. The other idea is to take, move your queen to b7 and then trade on the a file. That's what he's doing. And Fabi goes queen b8 with the idea of queen b7, and then you want to take on a1, rook a8, and just keep trading and draw the game, which is a great result for Caruana because draw would mean he beats Magnus here. Magnus is in a must win here. Okay, now for Magnus Carlsen, d5, is that a move that he would consider? Because d5, e5, I guess it does help white in some ways. Then you go knight d2, you go knight b3, you try to play on this side. Maybe this is the way in which he wants to continue. But clearly Magnus understands that Caruana's idea is queen b7 and trading pieces. And he tries to stop it with queen e4. He plays his queen to e4. But I think what he has missed is that Caruana has this very strong move. Because if you go knight f6, the queen parks itself on c6 square, which is a very nice square for the queen. And Magnus is aiming to get in here. So it's a very, very sly move. But I think the move that he has missed here is what Caruana is thinking about. d5. And you might think, oh, it's just a pawn blunder because I can take. No, because the knight jumps into f6 or queen comes to b7 pinning like this. So clearly this d5 move is a very, very nice one that Caruana has. But Fabi is taking a lot of time for this. I think he was ready with his move on the first go itself, but somehow he's gotten a bit confused. I'm not so sure what he is thinking about here. Yes, d5 takes. Knight f6, queen comes back. You can see how Magnus was ready for it. Now knight d5 is one possible move, trying to attack the b4 pawn. But he takes ed, which is also fine. And now the knight jumps into e5. Well, clearly you can't snatch this pawn here because of knight c6 and it's a deadly fork. So you need to play it differently. And I think what Magnus is aiming for, bishop d6, is to push b5 and plonk his knight on c6. And then his one pawn kind of dominates the two pawns here on b6 and c7. So bishop d6 played and pawn pushes forward to b5. And now this pawn is a very dangerous pawn because queen can come into c6, knight can come in here. You can also use this for your rooks to be doubled. Queen goes to e8, putting pressure on the b5 pawn. You can see Hikaru coming all the time in between the frames. There he's getting ready for his Armageddon against Pragnananda. Takes, queen takes. And now rook takes the open file, queen e8. Queen c6 played. If you take the queen, knight c6 is what Magnus wants. With the rook coming in, this will be a good position for white. But he just goes queen e7. And he tells Magnus that maybe I'm going to take here. Although taking the knight is not a particularly great idea, as after d takes e5, that pawn is protected by the bishop and the rook can attack the pawn on c7. That's exactly what Magnus does. So for the time being, white is doing okay because the bishop is defending this pawn. But imagine that you are able to trade off that bishop. h5, I like this move by Caruana. Takes away the back rank issues. Also starts to create some pressure on the king side. h3 played by Magnus, just taking away his back rank problems as well. Time wise, Magnus has 6 minutes 16 seconds. Caruana has 3 minutes 30 seconds. And now Fabiano has to decide the next plan of action. Maybe somewhere with this move h5, he was also preparing knight g4 to trade off this strong knight. He goes rook d8. And Magnus comes back queen c1. Very important move, preparing bishop a3. Well, queen e6 played. Can we go bishop a3 now? Not really, because bishop e5, d5 and perhaps queen e5. But then c7 is hanging. So maybe it's possible to go bishop a3. Will Magnus play it? Because this bishop is the fulcrum, it's the key aspect of black's position. Once it goes away, the c7 pawn becomes tremendously weak. He goes knight to c6. Rook goes to e8 and now bishop a3. So Magnus definitely creating some things for himself here. His position looking very, very good. But one thing which Magnus should not forget is, yes, knight coming in and then creating some play against the f2 pawn and on the king side. So he has to remain careful there. Queen takes d6 or pawn takes. There are advantages of pawn takes because this is no longer weak. The e5 square is controlled. So he plays queen takes on d6. It's a good move there. And now the knight comes in and jumps to e5. Rook goes to c8, defending this pawn. So black is passive, but he's hoping that he can kick away this knight with f6. Later on, maybe even break with c6. Just create the play on the king side. And now Magnus, who's down to 5 minutes 30 seconds, is thinking about what his next step should be. It's not so simple. One of the ideas is to reroute the rook to the c file and then enter this way and use the queen from the other side. It's possible. It's one way to go about this position, but it's not at all simple. He goes f3. He's just simply kicking the knight away from the center of the board. The knight moves into g3 and now looking at this massive fork here on e2. So the queen has to go away. Maybe queen c6 is what Magnus wants to play. Just move in the queen, but it's risky, right? Because you're leaving your king unsafe, and then the queen is planning to enter here from e1. So you can sense that Caruana is slowly making a comeback in this game. He was under pressure right from the opening, but now he has his own set of play here. After f6, even the e3 pawn will be weak, so there will be pressure from the e file that will come in. You can see Magnus taking his time. It's that pause of nothing happening, but so much happening in his head. He's just trying to figure out how can he win this position against a player like Caruana, who's so good. These are the moments where we realize that even the best players sometimes don't find the way to move forward. Queen trade on a3 could be another way, just hoping for a queen trade, because after the queens are traded, this is a pleasant endgame for white to play. The amount of time Magnus is spending for this move is insane. From having a 2-minute edge, now he has just 17 seconds of edge. So he thought for nearly 1 minute 45 seconds there. Goes queen a1. And maybe was it time well utilized? Well, only time will tell. Is Caruana going to kick this knight away with f6? And I've often seen that when one player thinks for a lot of time, the other player also sometimes slows down. It's like some kind of a mirror, you know. Okay, f6, the knight has to move away. He can go to g6 and then to f4. He can also go to d3, then to f4. Look at Magnus's focus on the board there. Immense. He's very close to winning Norway chess, and if he wins this Armageddon, he would then not have to worry so much about the game of Hikaru and Prague. Knight d3 played. But now black is getting his play, because rook e8, all of a sudden pressure on e3, knight is well positioned. He plays his pawn to h4, a useful move to keep this knight guarded. Later on, as we saw, the queen could enter somehow, and if it gives a check, it's a checkmate on the last rank. Magnus plays his king to f2. These are moves that are not so easy to make. King h7 played by Caruana. Queen b1, creating a discovered attack here. The knight can move, but where exactly can the knight move? And maybe Caruana should just block it here or go king h8 back. Not so sure. But Caruana is thinking a lot. Such moves are generally responded back very quickly because there's a concrete threat there. There's a concrete threat for Magnus. And Fabi takes his time here. And he plays rook e8. Wow! Very rare that such a discovered check is allowed when he could stop it. Magnus doesn't take it. He actually attacks the c7 pawn first. And tells Caruana, what's your plan now? Caruana down to a minute on his clock. 1 minute 48 seconds for Magnus Carlsen. Maybe there's a draw here. Rook, knight h1, king g1, knight g3. Because if you take on c7, I can exchange and take on e3. No, he goes rook e7. He defends the c7 pawn with his rook. And now, will Magnus go knight f4 check? Just opening this up. Then there is f5. Look at Magnus there. Waiting, trying to calculate, because he just saw that if he gives a check, there is a counter check. Oh, How many times does a discovered check land up with a counter check? Oh, is Caruana? Yes, he takes. What a position here. He takes on d5, gives a check again, pawn to e4. Fantastic chess by these two players. Amazing quality. And now queen takes d5 taken by Fabi. Takes on c7. Rook takes. Queen takes b5. The position is equal. Magnus comes queen f4. Caruana has managed to equalize. Now queen d3, the only move to keep the game balanced, because he keeps an eye on this pawn. Even though he loses this, king g8, and then he has the b pawn running, and if white tries to stop it, then the e3 pawn falls and it's a draw. But he goes queen b1 check, the mistake. And now he pushes the b pawn, but this is not going to be enough, because now you can see that Magnus Carlsen starts pushing his own d pawn. Fantastic chess here. King h7, queen f5 check, g6 played, and he gives another check. Is this a draw? Is the d pawn and the b pawn both similar in strength? No, Magnus says my pawn is stronger, it's closer to queening. And next move, he wants to give a check here and play d7. Magnus knows that he's winning here. Caruana pushes his pawn to b4, queen e7, king h6, d7, and Fabi resigns. Magnus Carlsen wins the Norway